Wartune is a game defined by its classes. Like it or not, choosing a different class will lead you to have a different experience in the game and overcome different challenges than somebody else who chose a different class. Class matters a lot, but are any of them better than the rest? Let's rank it objectively. Each class will be evaluated on a 50-point scale. The way they get these points is through the categories that I'm about to go over. Each category is worth at most 5 points and at least 1 point. This should provide an analytical way for us to see which classes are the best at what and how that will affect them overall. Here are our categories. Number 1, offense. How much offensive potential do their skills bring to the table? Number 2 is defense. Simply put, how are their stats affecting their defense, and are there any skills that will be helping them? Number 3, survivability. How long can they survive in a battle? This comes down to things like heals and self-sufficiency. Number 4, area of effect. This should be self-explanatory, but what is their potential on area of effect? Number 5, utility. There's skills like damnation, scattershot, purify. Things that can cast a negative or positive effect on you or the enemy will be classed as utility. They're things unique to the classes. And lastly, rage gain. At number 6, how fast will they be gaining rage? Our first 6 categories will amount to a total of 30 points. They are all based around the class's latent ability. But now, our next 20 points are based on these 4 categories, which are based on how well the classes perform in actual play. Number 1, we have solo PvE, think stuff like Catacombs and Necropolis. Solo PvP, which will mostly be duels and battlegrounds. Group PvE, things like Tower of Kings, Spire, and multiplayer dungeons. And lastly, group PvP, obviously things like Arena and Guild Battle. I do believe things like Guild Battle and Arena are more important, but we are looking at the game as a whole, so we will look at the classes as a whole. Everything here will be worth 5 points, and whichever class has the highest number of points at the end will win. The first class we're going to go over is the Mage. Let's get into it first with offense. For offense, I'm going to be giving the Mage a 3 out of 5. I think this is fair. Their most powerful offensive ability, Thunderer, is really carrying this. The rest of their kit is just not suited for offense. Their Delphics are weak. They have very little offensive support. Not none, just little. And the rest of their moves are more tailored towards AoE. But with the faster rage gain and the lower cooldowns, I can give them a 3. I think it's fair based on the amount of power that Thunderers chained together can put out. For defense, I'm going to give the Mage, unfortunately, a 1 out of 5. This is simply because their passive abilities just don't boost their defense in any meaningful regard. They have no health boost, no physical defense, just magic defense. This isn't terrible, but only boosting magic defense and no health is going to leave them a little bit weaker comparatively than other classes, and combine that with no real way to supplement their damage received other than the restoration ability. Next, for survivability, I'm going to give them a 5 out of 5. This is where the Mage truly excels. The Mage has so many heals. If you're fighting an enemy that can't just put you down in a few shots, you can pretty much stall them forever. Sure, that's not going to have you win, but that's survivability at its finest. The Mage was built for this, and that's what it does. Next is area of effect. We're going to give the Mage a 5 out of 5 there as well, simply because they have a short cooldown Rain of Fire, with talents, a short cooldown Meteoric Destroyer, 2 Delphics that aren't the greatest, but they do target AoE, and a utility type skill that hits AoE as well. I mean, really, that's just, what more could you ask for? Mages are the kings of AoE, and nobody can tell me otherwise. On to utility, I'm going to be giving the mages a 4 out of 5. Their purification skill is really great and a must-have in some areas. Their Suntoria is a must-have in a lot of places as well, and their Damnation is a very nice addition to their entire kit. The reason I'm not giving it a 5 out of 5 is because some classes, namely one, has utility that simply outclasses this, and thus I can't give this one a 5. But it is really good and necessary in a lot of regards. Utility gets a 4. Under Rage Gain, I think this is the mage's weakest attribute here. I'm going to give them a 2 out of 5 because in Light, Rage Gain has been increased. However, of all the classes, they're simply the slowest and the weakest in terms of rage. But that is due to balancing, because if they had the quickest Rage Gain, they'd be shitting out heals, Thunderers, everything. They'd be insane. So now moving on to their use cases. In solo PvE, I'm going to give the mage a 3 out of 5. They're very good for keeping up in things like Sky Trail and Catacombs and Necropolis, just because the heals can keep you going. You don't have a time limit on your health. The only time limit is decided by how much the boss, when they turn into the 1000% attack mode bonus. So the mage will get a 3 for that, just because they can hold their own, but they can't really end the fight as well as they want. For solo PvP, I'm going to give the mage a 2 out of 5. Now, solo PvP is a little bit of rock, paper, scissors, but I'm giving the mage a 2 because their strongest stat is going to be magic defense, and in PvP, most enemies are going to be doing, unless they're a fellow mage, physical damage. Now, you might say, oh, what if they bring a magical sylph, like Hercules? Okay, well, Hercules reduces your defense anyway, so does it really matter? My point being, mages are generally going to be the squishiest in solo PvP, and thus not that useful. Still can work, though. In group PvE, I'm going to give them a 5 out of 5. A mage is a requirement for Spire, for Tower of Kings, and for some MPDs. But if you're a requirement for Spire and Tower of Kings, that's it. 5 out of 5. Lastly, we have group PvP. Now, I would like to give them a 4 out of 5, but I'm going to give Mage a 3 out of 5 for this. Suntoria is super helpful in PvP. It really is. If it gets scattershotted, though, it's not as helpful. Purification is okay. Sometimes it'll be useful. Damnation is okay in PvP, but the problem with Mage in PvP is that generally they're going to cast Suntoria, and then it's going to be time to go into Sylph mode, and they won't be doing anything that makes them a mage anymore. They're just going to be another person dealing damage. Not to say they're bad in PvP. They're really good, especially with a good team setup. Just, they're not going to be doing anything insane unless you've already planned around something or some kind of strategy. And finally, our total for the mage is going to be 33 out of 50. Pretty solid. Let's move on to Knight. Jumping right into it for Knight, I'm going to be giving their offense a 4 out of 5. Now, their offense is entirely based around heavy hitting ultimate slashers, and now in Light being able to hit more of those and hitting 2 Delphics in single runs. There's a lot of shenanigans that you can do now that you couldn't do before. So that's going to be bringing Knight's offense up quite a bit. It's going to be hitting a nice 4 out of 5. Defense. Knight is going to get a 5 out of 5. When you come to defense, a Knight should be the class you think of. Shields, high HP, good physical defense. It's got pretty much everything except solid magic defense. That's holding it back a little bit, but I think the shields can make up for that. There's no other class with better defense than this one. That's for sure. For survivability, the Knight's going to get a 1 out of 5. It has no real ways to heal itself during battle. The health you have is the health you will get. You can't do battles of attrition for as long as, say, a mage, unless you've got some sort of other strategy built around it. You can heal from blocks, and that is relevant slightly early on, but the later into the game you get, the less this matters. So I think a 1 is fair. For area of effect, the knight is going to get a 2, simply because it even has the ability of Whirlwind Strike. That's the worst AoE in the game. It's quite slow. There's a lot of things I could say about it, but it is an AoE, so I'm going to give the knight a 2 out of 5. For utility, I'm going to give the knight a 3 out of 5, simply because it can be helpful in some situations and very useful in others. Something like Apollo Shield is great to have in any game mode, and Intercept can be useful, and when it is useful, it really helps. But that really can't bring it much higher than a 3 for me. For Rage Gain, it does gain Rage the fastest out of all classes, so I'm going to be giving it a 5 out of 5 there. Enough said. On to the use cases of the class. In solo PvE, it can often come up quite lacking. The damage is okay, but it won't be the greatest, and since you won't really have any heals to sustain yourself, the knight is going to be falling behind. Usually, it's supposed to be able to win battles of attrition, but in PvE especially, a lot of enemies will simply cancel that with a 1000% bonus. It's not useless in PvE, you can still use it, especially with a strong strategy, but that's something else to talk about. For solo PvP, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I don't think any class really takes advantage of rock, paper, scissors in matchups as much as the knight does. It can counter archers with its innate critical defense, and it can deal with mages with its high physical attack in comparison to them. Really, it's not better than the other classes per se in that regard of PvP. It's just able to perform better against them if you were to put them in a one-on-one scenario. Usually. Once again, depends on the strategy. For group PvE, I'm going to give the knight a 3 out of 5, simply because it's a great addition on any team, but it's not required. Same thing for group PvP. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 as well. A team could do great with an archer substituting a knight, or a mage substituting a knight. They have their role, and that's to tank. If your team needs a tank, or specifically needs the shield type abilities, bring a knight. If they don't bring a knight. That's why I don't think it gets much higher than that, simply because it's more of an optional pick that can help in most cases. After all that said, that brings our knights total to 32. 1 under the mage. Very close. Last but not least, on to our archer. So, in terms of our offense, Archer's going to score a 5 out of 5, as obviously. It's an attack specialist that goes heavy into crit, fast abilities, and abilities that do high damage. There is really no gap in its offensive kit. For defense, I'm going to give the Archer a 3 out of 5, just because they're only buffing up their HP, which is good, and their defense is pretty much directly average. This is good. Average defense, good health. I'm going to give them an average score. 3 out of 5. For survivability, I'm also going to give them a 3, just because the Bloodthirsty Strike is a very strong healing ability. Taking it into account, though, that it will not always hit troops to heal very high amounts, but sometimes it will hit players or tougher bosses, this won't be keeping you alive as well as, say, a mage could. So I'm going to give them a 3 out of 5 here, but it could be better, depending on what happens in the particular battle. For area of effect, I'm going to give archers a 3 out of 5. So their Lunatic Fire ability is really great. Just amazing. But they only really have one AoE aside from their very expensive Delphic, and the Lunatic Fire even having a 20-second cooldown with talents just isn't going to change that for me. I think you could give them a 4, but I'm going to give them a 3, just because they only have the one ability, and its cooldown is relatively high. Mages will remain the only undisputed AoE champions. For utility, Archer's just going to get a solid 5 out of 5. Anything else would just be disrespectful. They've got heals. They can lower the damage an enemy does. They can lower enemy defense. They can slow down enemies by a substantial margin. They do have the poison shot if you want a poisoning effect on your opponent. And they have the ability to buff up all allies' damage just by existing. And they also can clear all buffs from pretty much anything in PvE or PvP, which is useful sometimes and necessary others. So anything less than a 5 here would just be wrong. Next, we've got our use cases, our rage gain. Rage gain, I'm just going to give Archer a 4 out of 5. It's close to the Knight, but a little bit more random, and even with perfect RNG, you're never going to really hit that Knight rage gain quite as good as they do. Onto the use cases. In solo PvE, the Archer is the undisputed champion, getting a 5 out of 5. This is just due to all of the stuff in their kit, really. They've got heals, they got slows, everything that they could need, it will be used. Solo PvP, Archers do suffer a little bit in a one-on-one against Knights, but a smart Archer can usually take the win. I'm going to give them a 3 because they're pretty much average. They'll beat Mages, usually, and lose to Knights, usually. That's just the way it goes. Of course, there's outplay potential, but we're not really taking that into account here. For group PvE, we're going to give them a 5 out of 5, simply because bringing extra damage to the table, bringing a damage dealer in general, is necessary. Sometimes Scatter Shot is necessary. Incendiary Shot is sometimes necessary. You can see the pattern here. You need them. Same exact thing for group PvP, which is also going to be getting a 5 out of 5. They're just going to be bringing too much to the table to go into a PvP fight without an Archer. You won't have the ability to scatter off buffs. You won't have the ability to lower the damage your opponents do. You'll just be left out in the dry without an Archer. With all that being said, the Archer's total comes out to 41. Let's rank the classes. Coming in at number 3, we have the Knight with 32 points. At number 2, we have the Mage with 33 points. And at number 1, we have the Archer with 41 points. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you like content like this, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and hopefully I'll keep making more. This is going to be the second public real guide video that I post on this channel. The rest of them are available. They're just locked to people only in our guild. If you are interested in more content like this, feel free to reach out to me and ask if you'd like to join the guild. I'll usually be happy to accept almost anybody. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.